and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Kay Elloian. Our show topic today, GMO fraud, your food, your health, and your government. Our guest is public interest attorney Stephen Druker. He's the author of a newly released book, Altered Genes, Twisted Truth. Mr. Druker is one of the first person to ever sue the FDA over the issue of GMO fraud. Let's welcome attorney Stephen Druker. Welcome, Mr. Druker.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
I read your book. I've been leafing through it, and it's fascinating. People have no clue what is really going on out there.
That's right, and it's designed that way so people don't get the real idea of what's been happening to their food through genetic engineering.
Yeah, tell us about what's going on in your lawsuit.
Well, by the way, the book is subtitled How the Venture to Genetically Engineer Our Food Has Subverted Science, Corrupted Government, and Systematically Deceived the Public. And it does establish all of those main points in great detail with solid evidence. And that's one reason it's so mind-boggling, because it's difficult to understand how science could have been subverted so badly, how the government, not just the U.S. government, but so many other governments have been really corrupted, not through bribes necessarily. In fact, I don't think there have been outright bribes, but just corrupted in the sense of being pressured to take very bad decisions, and in the case of the FDA, to actually defraud the public, to lie about the facts, and of course, deception of the public. That's been going on for years around the world. So what's been happening at the FDA, as you asked, is that the FDA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Environmental Protection Agency have since 1986 been operating under an agenda that came down from the White House, first the Reagan White House, but renewed by every successive White House, an agenda to promote biotechnology and to ease the introduction of its products onto foreign and domestic markets. So the FDA has been acting to promote genetically engineered foods. They also claim they can regulate them responsibly at the same time. But I think anybody would recognize that's a major conflict of interest, and something's got to give. Well, what gave was the duty to responsibly regulate these foods. The FDA has been acting essentially as the Washington branch of Monsanto and DuPont and the industry, and they have been basically front people for the industry, and they've been doing what they can to get genetically engineered foods onto the market and keep them on the market with minimal fuss, with minimal strain to the industry, and with minimal information dispensed to the public. In fact, not just minimal information, they have been twisting the facts and lying to the American public and to the world. They've been doing it since 1992 at least, and it's time that people woke up and realized what's been going on.
Well, people don't know what's going on because they've been told time and again these products are safe, the FDA has oversight over them, but you're saying that this is not the case at all.
Legally, the FDA does have oversight, and if the law had been followed, which it has not, but if the law had been followed, the FDA would have been rigorously regulating these foods. Every one of them would have had to be demonstrated safe through standard scientific procedures before it was allowed on the market. But in reality, the FDA has turned its back on the law and actually not only ignored it, violated it, and allowed genetically engineered foods to come to market without one smidgen of regulation here in the United States. So the FDA has even admitted, when they've been forced to, that they are not regulating the biotechnology industry in terms of genetically engineered foods one bit. The regulation is so zero, basically, that a manufacturer can dump GMOs on our market without even telling the FDA that it's doing it. So now, according to law, that shouldn't be happening. According to law, every one of these foods should have been carefully tested before it came to market. So the FDA is violating the law. It has also been lying.
Their own law.
Well, yeah, the laws their own regulations that were
regulations.
passed pursuant to a law that Congress passed in 1958, which made it very clear that foods containing new additives had to be demonstrated safe. And the FDA has just basically violated that law, continues to do it, and they continue to get away with it. But one reason I wrote my book was to blow the whistle on this whole thing.
So you're the whistleblower here.
Well, it turns out I am, and I know the extent to which the FDA has been lying, because through the lawsuit that I initiated, the FDA was forced to hand over more than 44,000 pages of its internal documents relevant to the policy that it issued on genetically engineered foods.
And you would not have gotten that under the Freedom of Information Act.
It would have been extremely difficult, probably impossible, to get all of everything that we got. And in going through all of those pages, I uncovered numerous memoranda that had been written by the FDA's own scientists about the risks of genetically engineered food and the need to test them. Now, back before the FDA issued its 1992 policy statement, it had put together a task force composed of scientists from the major divisions within the FDA scientific branches that needed to provide input if they were actually going to have a science-based policy. And initially, they began to operate as if they actually wanted to produce a science-based policy. So they put together a team of experts from within the FDA, and they had them studying all the best available information about genetic engineering and genetically engineered foods. But the memoranda that were being submitted to the biotechnology coordinator and through him to the higher ups at the FDA were not what the FDA wanted to hear, not if they were going to promote these foods, because the FDA scientists were uniformly and overwhelmingly telling the FDA superiors genetic engineering is very different than traditional breeding. It entails a different set of risks, and the foods that it creates cannot be presumed safe unless and until each one of them has undergone rigorous scientific testing, safety testing. Now, interestingly, this is what the law requires anyway.
Right, it does.
As I was mentioning, in fact, under our laws, under the statute, the relevant part of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
Well, it's Title 21 of the United States Code.
All of these new foods are presumed unsafe until they're demonstrated safe. And the manufacturer has a burden of proving that they're safe. But the FDA has reversed that presumption and presumed they're all safe and put the burden on the people with concerns to prove that they're not safe.
So they've shifted the burden.
They've shifted the burden illegally and surreptitiously. Most people don't realize that's happened. So that the burden of proof has been illegally shifted and placed on the shoulders of people like me and taken off the shoulders of Monsanto and DuPont and Dow Chemical. Now, the interesting thing is, as I mentioned, they shouldn't have been able to do that, and the FDA scientists were telling their superiors, as a matter of science, you're required to do what the law already requires you to do. Because even if the FDA scientists hadn't provided any input, as a matter of law, the FDA should have presumed all of these foods unsafe and made sure they were demonstrated safe. But the FDA scientists were actually making the case more compelling. They were in essence saying, even if the law didn't require this, sound science requires it. So in other words, the FDA administrators knew that both as a matter of law and as a matter of science, they could not presume genetically engineered foods were safe, that they needed to rigorously regulate them and require solid safety testing. And what did they do? They covered up all of those memos, they ignored them, and then they lied about them. In their official policy statement of May of 1992, the FDA claimed that it was not aware of any information showing that foods derived through genetic engineering differ in any uniform or meaningful way from other foods. That's just an outright lie, because their files contain ample information from their own scientists about the unique risks and the need to test. And by the way, I just should mention 24 key documents from the FDA files have been posted since 2000 on the website of my organization, the Alliance for Biointegrity. So people can go to that website, www.biointegrity.org. They can read for themselves what the FDA scientists said. They don't have to take my word for it.
And you've got that information only because you initiated the lawsuit.
That's right.
And most people aren't in the position to do what you did. But being an attorney, public interest attorney, you had the organization that could do the research. And it's a mind-boggling that there's actual scientists, government scientists, that are saying this is not good, that you cannot tell where, when you do this recombinant DNA work, you can't tell where that gene's going to be. And you don't know what toxin that's going to
They mentioned, as have
forth.
other independent experts who've reviewed the issue. For instance, several years later, experts with the Royal Society of Canada released a major report stating essentially what the FDA scientists had said. Genetic engineering is different than traditional breeding. It entails different risks, and there are risks of unintended side effects, so that the focus only on the intended expression product of the inserted gene cannot be the only focus. And if that's the only focus, it's unscientific, because it's well known. It was pointed out time and again by FDA scientists, pointed out again by the Canadian experts, has been pointed out by numerous other scientists, that there is a risk. There's an inherent risk in the technology itself. And as you mentioned, there is a risk of disrupting the metabolism of the target organism in unintended ways. There could be several ways in which unintended harmful side effects could be created, and new toxins or new allergens or other new substances that are anti-nutritive and harmful could be created, and it would be very difficult to detect these novel harmful substances without careful, rigorous testing of the whole food. That kind of testing has not been adequately performed, and according to the FDA, it doesn't need to be performed at all, and they're not requiring any of it. So a manufacturer could just focus on the U.S., and they wouldn't have to do a smidgen of testing, according to the FDA.
You know, actually, in this country, people did die. It was an L-tryptophan supplement that was put on the market back in the 1980s. It was genetically modified with a bacterium. And it killed several people, and it permanently injured, I think it was about 1,500 people. It attacked their heart, their liver, their vital organs, because it was a genetically modified bacterium that was inserted or used in the process of the L-tryptophan.
Right. There was, as you mentioned, and this is important to emphasize, this was the very first ingestible product of recombinant DNA technology or genetic engineering that was commercialized. The very first one caused a major epidemic in the United States. As you mentioned, it began in 1989, carried over into 1990. According to the most recent estimates of the Center for Disease Control, between 4,000 and 5,000 Americans were seriously sickened, dozens were killed, and at least hundreds were invalids for the rest of their lives, never recovered fully from that serious and highly painful disease that they
ingested.
That they basically, disease that was created in their physiologies from ingesting the product of genetic engineering. As you mentioned, there were genetically engineered bacteria that were used to create that food supplement, and that was a completely safe supplement up to the time genetic engineering was used in the manufacturing process. And the evidence as a whole strongly points to the genetic engineering as the key cause of the toxic contamination that turned that harmless supplement into a deadly agent. And there's a whole chapter in my book on that. And
also, lab animals, from what I've read, the lab animals are getting tumors and of having all kinds of autoimmune and digestive problems, and they're not doing very well with some of the testing that has taken place with genetically modified ingredients.
Well, there are several tests that have been conducted on genetically engineered foods that have not ended happily for the laboratory animals that were consigned to dine on those foods instead of the conventional foods that were used as the control products. So several well-designed studies have been published in standard peer-reviewed scientific journals, have demonstrated serious harm to laboratory animals that ingested one or another product of genetic engineering. So we're talking about something very serious. That evidence gets either buried or attacked viciously and misrepresented. And we have misrepresentation here going on not just by the Food and Drug Administration and not just by the industry, but by mainstream scientific establishment. Numerous eminent scientists at respected universities or respected scientific institutions have made it their business to add to the deception, to help suppress evidence that goes against genetic engineering, or if they can't suppress it, to twist it, to distort it, and to make people think that either it was shoddy work or to twist it and make it say something that it doesn't. But that has happened. It's solidly documented in my book. In fact, the fraud after the fraud that's been perpetrated on behalf of genetically engineered food, it's astounding. If people read it all, it's hard to believe that many deceptions have been perpetrated and that they've been successful. And if one actually puts together, assesses the aggregate fraud and compares the aggregate fraud committed by scientists now we're talking about the scientific fraud over the years on behalf of genetically engineered food, and compares that fraud with all previous scientific frauds, this fraud, aggregate fraud that's been perpetrated on behalf of genetically engineered food stands by far as the biggest fraud in the history of science.
Now, what about labeling? There's now a big push for labeling of genetically modified ingredients. What are your feelings on that?
Well, the big campaigns for labeling in the United States have had a very good effect in terms of educating people about the fact that they have been consuming genetically engineered foods. Prior to those major labeling campaigns and all of the publicity that accompanied them, most Americans didn't really know much about what genetically engineered foods were, and certainly didn't understand that they had been in the U.S. market in a significant way since 1996, and that they and their children had been ingesting them regularly, daily, since then. And so that had a major effect. I think at this point, though, it's time to move beyond just the focus on labeling, because these foods are on the market illegally. If a food is on the market illegally, the proper remedy is not to label it. You take it off the market. Labeling is actually something for foods that are on the market. Labeling is a procedure to give consumers added information about foods that are legally on the market. GMOs are illegally on the market. So it's actually, I think, misleading to argue for labeling them. It certainly would be misleading for me to argue that they should be labeled, because I know too much. I know they're illegal and should be off the market.
But from a practical standpoint, however, though, they're on the market. There's a lot of money behind them. There's the whole industry behind them. There's lobbying behind them. What do you suggest for the average consumer? Because the FDA is showing it's not policing what it should be policing. It's not effectively enforcing those laws that are in fact on the book. And in fact, I just want to mention that there's even talk about this Trans-Pacific Partnership that may even lessen some of the transparency on some of these rules if this takes place, if this goes through.
Well, my advice is to consumers: first, get the facts and start shopping intelligently and do what you can to avoid purchasing genetically engineered foods. That will be better for you and your family. Certainly you would be eating in a safer mode. B, it sends a very powerful message because you vote with your dollars when you buy food.
With your pocketbook.
So if enough people start, and many people are turning away from GMOs, and if more do, that's a very powerful fact in itself. That registers with manufacturers and with suppliers. But certainly if genetically engineered foods are going to be on the market, then they should be labeled. But my goal is to get enough people informed about the facts so that they will come off the market. They should have never come to market. They should not be on the market. And my aim is to get them banned. And so I'm focusing on that. Whoever wants to focus on a ban, and there are many people that have focused on labeling over the last few years who've come to the realization that we do need to now push for a ban. But if people want to focus on labeling and fight for labeling, they should do it. That's having a good effect too. My recommendation is get educated, get active, and do what you feel is going to be the most effective use of your time and influence. And I can't tell people what that is. They can decide for themselves.
So write your congressman, write to the FDA, do whatever.
I wouldn't write to the FDA. I don't think it'll have any effect. I'd save your energy. The FDA does not pay attention they didn't pay attention to their own scientists. Why will they pay attention? No, try to get people who still have a chance of being convinced. Use your energy to convince them. Do what you can. Talk to your local health food store and say, why are you still carrying this package that has GMOs in it? You know, and I'd work. Well, I think you could give good recommendations. You'd probably know more about the practical
I say
part
buy
than mine.
organic. You know, right now there's this fight for labeling.
Yeah.
So until people really know what they're buying, I say buy organic because at least it's certified. There's another party involved.
Right.
I'm just concerned when the government is policing himself.
Right.
It's like the fox guard in the hen house. You know they're not going to want to do it because there's so much money and influence behind all this.
Well, and even if you can't always buy organic, there is a non-GMO verified project, and they have a label. And if you buy a packaged product that has the non-GMO verification, non-GMO project verified, then that's gone through rigorous review, and you have very good reason to believe that food food contains zero or at least minimal GMOs. So I'd shop smart.
So basically what you're saying is there are laws in the books. The FDA is not enforcing the law. It's voluntary.
It's breaking the law, in fact.
Breaking the law. It's voluntary whether even a manufacturer of one of these GMOs even goes to the FDA and says, hey, I've got a new product on the market.
Yeah. Most of the big ones inform the FDA, and they go through a voluntary consultation process. But that's smoke and mirrors. It allows them to have the illusion that the FDA did some kind of scientific review on their product. But in reality, that voluntary consultation process is not a scientific review, and the FDA has admitted that at least twice, probably more, but I have at least 2 different cases in which FDA officials have admitted that voluntary review process is not a scientific review. And in fact, I discovered a memo in the FDA files when they were planning how to deal with this, that they said we don't want to give the illusion of industry self-regulation, so what we could do is have this voluntary review, and it will give the impression that there's some regulation going on, when in essence there isn't at all. In reality, there isn't at all. So that was set up again to hoodwink the public, and it's done a great job. It's even hoodwinked most members of Congress. They think there's some scientific review going on.
They do.
There isn't at all, not in this country. Not a scientific review of the safety of GMOs, not on the part of the FDA. Zero review.
There was a review in Canada, I believe.
Minuscule. Canada has some review, but the Canadian experts lambasted that as being scientifically indefensible, scientifically unjustifiable, to conclude that any genetically engineered food is safe based on the kind of review that the Canadian regulators are giving it. So even though Canada is slightly better than the U.S., it's just about as bad. Very deficient testing and no labeling. So Canadians are pretty much being as ill-treated as the U.S. Consumers. So both in Canada and the United States, 2 presumably very progressive democracies, their populace are being hoodwinked on this. Hoodwinked and subjected to unnecessary risk,
basically
both in Canada and in the United States. It shouldn't be happening. And if I have, if my book gets read by enough people of influence, this whole venture will just plummet. It'll collapse. It cannot survive a full and honest airing of the facts. It cannot survive being put in line with solid science.
The book is Altered Genes, Twisted Truth, and it was even Jane Goodall wrote the foreword, I believe,
correct,
on your book.
In which she states, Jane Goodall in her foreword states that my book is without doubt one of the most important books of the last 50 years.
And one of them wrote you should win a Nobel Prize. I read that as well.
She ended her foreword with stating that she regards me as a hero and that I deserve at least a Nobel Prize. So that's very gratifying coming from somebody like Jane Goodall, whom I regard as a great hero, and I think she should have received a Nobel Prize by now for what she's been doing.
Well, your work is fascinating. You're standing up where our government has failed, and I want to thank you for doing that. I'm sure the American public wants to thank you for that. Your book is fascinating. It's a must-read. It's just amazing in this century that these things are happening under the noses of all our congressmen, and no one knows what's really going on.
Yes, well, hopefully more people will know, and when enough people know, then genetically engineered foods will be over. That whole venture will be over, because it is fact-averse. It is not based on science, but it's been based on the systematic subversion of science, and that's well documented. Mm-hmm. That is well documented, and my book has been praised by several scientists who've read it thoroughly. And in fact, one of them has stated, my book demonstrates that what is at stake is not just the safety of our food and not just the future of agriculture, but the future of science itself. He thinks the future of science is on the line when it comes to genetically engineered food. And scientists need to wake up and fight to save science.
And people need to wake up and tell their congressmen.
And I hope enough people will soon wake up, and then we will basically, the whole genetically engineered food venture will end, and all those massive resources will go into safe and sustainable modes of farming,
which we need to focus on. Well, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for being our guest. It's a fascinating topic. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in to see Attorney Stephen Druker sharing his information on his book. I also want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. For more information on today's topic and our guests, please visit the Legal Edition online at thelegaledition.com. And as always, this information is for educational purposes only. It is not to be relied upon or construed as legal, business, or medical advice. And please consult an advisor as to your particular legal, business, or medical needs. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on The Legal Edition.